We previously examined the kinked demand curve, a model that describes why prices in an oligopoly remain sticky once they are established. However, as this text highlights, the model only offers an ex post explanation. It fails to account for the ex ante process, specifically how that initial price level was determined before it became resistant to change. This leaves us with a critical question. How do these firms actually calculate their initial output and price targets? The price leadership model provides the geometric and mathematical framework to answer that question. Understanding the oligopoly requires looking past the observation of price stability to identify the specific mechanism that establishes a price benchmark among competitors. Most real-world oligopolies feature firms of unequal size, typically consisting of one dominant firm that controls a large market share and several smaller fringe firms. A dominant firm could theoretically launch a price war to bankrupt these smaller rivals and secure a complete monopoly. But as the research suggests, such aggressive tactics carry the risk of retaliatory price wars that could lead to catastrophic losses for everyone involved. This creates a powerful incentive for firms to seek a cooperative arrangement. Rather than forming an explicit illegal cartel, firms often adopt imperfect collusion. The dominant firm takes the lead in setting the price, and the others follow its signal. In this model, the dominant firm allows the fringe firms to sell as much as they want at the price it establishes. The leader maintains its position by treating the smaller competitors as a fixed variable, maximizing its own profit by controlling the remaining portion of the market. This graph shows the total market demand curve, DM. It represents the total quantity consumers are willing to buy at various price points. Consider the position of the fringe firms. Once the dominant firm announces a price, these smaller players must decide how to respond. Because they lack the power to influence the market price, they act as price takers, following the logic of perfect competition, where they produce up to the point where price equals their marginal cost. By horizontally summing the individual marginal cost curves of all these small firms, we derive the total fringe supply curve, SG. We now have a visual representation of both the total market demand, DM, and the supply the fringe firms are prepared to offer, SG. The dominant firm utilizes these fringe firms like predictable components of a larger system, allowing them to operate according to their own costs while it plans its next move. The dominant firm focuses on residual demand, the portion of the market left over after the fringe firms have met their supply goals. We will use this second panel to map that demand. If the price is set high at P1, the fringe firms supply the entire market at point A. This leaves the dominant firm with zero demand. At a very low price, P3, the fringe firms cannot cover their costs and produce nothing. At this level, the total market demand belongs entirely to the dominant firm. Now we examine the critical middle ground at price P2. At price P2, total consumer demand is at point C, but the fringe firms only supply the quantity at point B. The length of the segment BC represents the specific market share that remains for the dominant firm to satisfy. We can slide this horizontal distance, BC, onto our second graph to mark point F. This diagram illustrates the principle. The dominant firm's demand curve is the result of horizontally subtracting the fringe supply, SG, from the market demand, DM. Connecting these points across all price levels generates the residual demand curve, DD. By isolating the demand left behind by the fringe firms, the leader creates a specific economic landscape designed for its own profit maximization. With the residual demand curve, DD, established, we can now determine the firm's strategic response. The dominant firm acts as a monopolist within this specific residual market. It derives its marginal revenue curve, MRD, which slopes downward at twice the rate of the residual demand curve. We then incorporate the firm's own marginal cost curve, MCD. The intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost at point G determines the optimal output level, QD. Projecting this quantity up to the residual demand curve at point F and across to the axes reveals the final market price, P2. Market price P2 represents a rigorous mathematical alignment between the dominant firm's internal costs and the external constraints of its rivals. This completed model shows how P2 functions across the market, balancing two sets of economic rules simultaneously. At price P2, fringe firms produce quantity P2B according to perfect competition. The dominant firm produces quantity QD, exactly equal to the remaining market gap, BC. The combined output of the fringe and leader perfectly meets consumer demand, clearing the market. While illegal cartels involve risky coordination, the price leadership model achieves stability through a blend of fringe competition and leader-led monopoly. We can now apply this logic to a changing market. Suppose a decrease in raw material costs shifts the fringe supply curve, SG, to the right. Consider how this shift would reshape the residual demand curve and what the resulting impact would be on the equilibrium price, P2. True economic analysis requires understanding the internal logic of these lines to deduce exactly how the system rebalances as variables shift.